My name is Jim, I'm the owner of Dynatrac, and we want to talk to you today about our heavy-duty ball joints. The Dynatrac heavy-duty ball joints are one of our best sellers, and a lot of you want to install these at home. So we want to show you how to do it right so that you get long service life out of these and get it down the road as quickly and easily as possible. So I've got Noah here with me today. He's going to be working on this Jeep, and we're going to put some new Dynatrac heavy-duty ball joints in it. We wanted to show you the tools we're going to use and what comes with the ball joints themselves so you know what you need to start the job. So there's two ways of doing ball joints like this. One, you can take the whole car and the ball joints to a shop, a professional shop. Alignment shops do this all the time, a competent repair shop. They will have all this equipment and the skills and experience to do the job well. The other way is you can do this at home. These tools that we're showing you are tools that we use here at Dynatrac every day. These are professional tools. You don't have to buy these. You can actually rent these at a lot of auto parts stores. But one of these, the larger one, is used to remove the ball joints, and the smaller one is used to install the ball joints. We also have an accessory kit that we sell. It has these two small parts in it. If you're going to do this at home with these tools, we recommend you order this with the ball joint kit. All right, you ready to go?
Ready when you are.
All right, let's do it. So step one, before we're going to tackle disassembly, is to drain the oil from the differential. So the factory 44 under your JK has a drain plug. If you have an aftermarket axle like a ProRock 44, we do not put drain plugs on ProRock 44s because we don't want them to be dragged over a rock and inadvertently unscrew, thus leaving you with a dry differential that could burn up. So you'll have to crack the differential cover on that. The other thing is that different diff covers that are available on the marketplace have different fill hole locations and various levels of oil in the axle. So draining the oil, regardless of what diff cover you're using and what axle you're using, is a good first step. Now that we have that wheel out of the way, let's get that caliper off. And to do that, we're going to use a 13mm socket and a short breaker bar.
When you break this bolt loose, the tendency is, since there's Loctite on these threads, is that the bolt and the sleeve are both going to spin. So to keep the sleeve from spinning, just get a pair of channel locks and just break that loose. Since these shoes are worn in a little bit, they're going to stick to the rotor a little bit, and they're held in by these clips. So this caliper slides off, but you don't want to just let it hang. So just get something, a wire or strap, wiggle this guy off, like so. Find some place to hook it. Typically find a place in the body frame or even off the spring is fine. The next step, we're just going to remove this caliper bracket. Get a long breaker bar, 21mm socket, come in behind. There's two bolts, one on top, one on the bottom. Just break it loose. So you just want to come in behind it, like so. And break it loose. So now that we got the both bolts removed, hold the caliper bracket and slide everything right off. You really want to keep these together because these pads wear in to the rotor and they're not always symmetrical. So you really don't want to flip-flop them. And on some car designs, they're only meant to go on one side. In this case, we'll just keep this guy together. The rotor just slides right off, nice and easy. Now on some older vehicles, maybe from East Coast vehicles, may have a lot of rust. These might be hard to get off. All you want to do is just get a hammer, hit it here, here, and here. Just loosen this up and it should break loose. Before we take the axle nut off, you want to remove the ABS sensor. Get your Allen key, get some leverage on it if you have to. And when you reinstall this, new Loctite is recommended. These should just come out by hand, but if they fight you a little bit, don't be aggressive. Just a little bit of pressure and wiggle that guy right out. Now we're going to leave it about halfway out because at this point we need to take this off. The unit bearing, the 3 bolts on the back, and all of this is going to slide off, and that's going to give us a little bit extra room to wiggle the plate and pull the ABS sensor through. So if you look back here behind your JK knuckle, you'll see 1, 2, and then there's a third one on the backside which we can't see. And what you want to use is a 13mm 12-point socket, and this is kind of a big time saver. It's got some adjustability so you can get in here, because as you see, the yoke of the axle kind of gets in the way. You can spin this freely and get it out of your way. but this just gives you a better angle. If you don't have one of these, a 13mm wrench, you can break it loose that way, but I find this is the best solution. Break that one, and that one. Then we can move on to the axle nut. So now what you want to use is a 36mm socket, 6-point. Either use a breaker bar or a pretty heavy duty impact to take this off. Now we'll go ahead and try to remove the hub if we can. There we go. So now that it's loose, pull this off. Not all the way, because now we want to try to remove the plate. Pull the ABS sensor all the way out. Make sure that the sensor is complete. Make sure that it's not broken or damaged. Slide that out of our way. And go ahead and remove the hub and the plate. Now that everything's been removed, the only thing that we need to remove now is the axle shaft itself. So since there's oil, residual oil that's still trapped inside the differential, when we pull the shaft out, use a shop rag to kind of wipe the axle clean as we pull this out. Sometimes you might have to come in with a small pry bar. Come in behind the yoke of the axle shaft, just give it a little bit of pressure. Don't pry on this plastic dust shield or you'll end up breaking it. Turn the knuckle back straight and remove the axle shaft. Okay, so now that the axle shaft has been removed, we want to take off the nuts that hold the knuckle to the end forging. We'll start with the bottom one. There's a cotter pin that holds this in place. Bend this back straight. There you go. Get a 7/8 wrench and break it loose. You may need to use a little bit extra force to break it loose. And this nut, by the way, also includes the ABS clip. We want to make sure when we reinstall that this clip is put in the same direction that it came off. That way the sensor can route itself properly. So before we can get the knuckle completely off, we want to take the tie rod and the drag link assembly off so we can actually pull this down. These tendency to get stuck because it's a tapered pull. So what you want to do is just lightly tap. There we go, there's one. So now that we've got the suspension assembly away, now when you're removing this knuckle, this one slides off pretty easy, but on some of the older Jeeps, you may have to use a hammer and just tap on this end forging and break this thing loose. Now when it does come loose, just be careful because it will fall. What we're going to do now is we're going to remove the lower ball joint, and we need something to receive the ball joint as it falls through and something to press down on it as we use the tool. So this is the appropriate diameter, slips right over, and it's also deep enough so where this pin doesn't bottom out on this receiver. It fits in there just like that. Now for the press tool, something that is a little bit smaller than this diameter, you don't want to run into a problem where you press in, let's say this side, and it gets stuck into your end forging. So we're going to use this in conjunction with the other tool. Now to set this guy up, unthread this all the way down as far as it goes without pulling the pin out. Slip it over the bottom and through. Take your press tool, set it on there like that. Bring your seat over the top, and on the back, there's a little set screw that holds that in place. And by hand, not with an impact, thread this receiver into place. If you use an impact, it can come up and it can hit the boot, or it could come off at an angle. You just want to make sure everything lines up. Now, you can do this with an impact, or you can do it with a long breaker bar. I recommend an impact, it's a little bit faster, but for this demonstration, we're going to use the impact. As you can see right there, it's popped loose. And if this shifts in any direction, let's say for instance it started to move off the end, undo it, recenter it, and then try it again. So before we take the upper ball joint off, remove the boot. Since we removed the lower ball joint, now we have access to put the tool into place. Want to slide the tool up into the ball joint, take our receiver, and set it in there just like that. There you go. Before we install our new ball joints, we want to clean all this rust out of the bore. So acetone brake cleaner, just spray it on a rag and just wipe all this material off. And to get the rust, use Scotch-Brite pad or some fine grit emery cloth or sandpaper. So on this lower ball joint, a lot of times with these tools that you might rent or even buy, you might end up damaging the end forging. Not a big issue. Just take a rounded file, come in there and just, without widening the actual bore, just take some of these damaged material off. That way it's a smooth transition when the new ball joint goes in. Okay, so now that we have the bores are nice and clean, deburred, everything's ready to go, what we're gonna do is we're going to install the bottom first and then the top. Okay, so to prep these ball joints, what we're gonna do is use a little bit of anti-seize. It doesn't have to be a whole lot. And we want to do the same thing to the top and bottom. And we're gonna come over here to the housing and do the same thing. Okay, so as we mentioned before, these are the tools that we're gonna use that are recommended by Dynatrac to install these ball joints. So we're gonna take our spacer, set it in there like that. We'll take the lower ball joint, and what you wanna do is feed the pin up and through the top, and in there just like that. And the orientation of this circuit fitting is important. This has to face the front of the vehicle or the rear of the vehicle. Now that it's in place, we'll take our receiver, and thread this down by hand, and that's how it should look. So now that everything's lined up, you want to make sure that everything is seated. The spacer, this puck, and everything's in a line, including this receiver at the top. You don't want it hanging off the edge of the end forging, and you want this pin to be seated into that pocket. Now that it's installed, you want to make sure that there is absolutely no gap between the end forging and the bottom of that ball joint. And make sure that it's flush. It's not cocked at an angle, it's straight up and down. Moving on, lower ball joint, all the way seated, nice and clear, didn't damage anything all the way through. So now we're gonna move on to the top. There is a part number on these ball joints, so make sure it's facing out when you install these. And the spacer that were provided by Dynatrac looks like this. Fits right on top of that cage. Take your C-clamp tool, use the adapter, slide it under and over, just like that. Take your receiver. You'll also notice too that this puck has an angle that's cut into the adapter. Make sure that that taper or that incline matches the end forging. You don't want it in the opposite way. You'll risk installing the ball joint at some odd angles. So make sure just everything looks straight as it's going in. Take your time. You shouldn't feel a whole lot of resistance. It should go in fairly smooth. And as I said before, with the lower and upper, this body of the ball joint is going to be flush with no air gaps whatsoever to the bottom of that end forging. And that's it. Okay, so now that we have our new ball joints installed, we can go ahead and install our steering knuckle again. So now that we have our knuckle secured, we want to torque these, the upper and lower, to the manufacturer's torque spec. Install our locking cotter pin. Moving on to our axle reassembly. Just be careful when you slide this axle back in, not to damage the inner seal. Now there's a guide ring, plastic guide ring, that's going to help you slide the axle in. Once you feel it engage, you want to give it a little bit of a turn. You should feel it slip and engage into the differential splines. Go ahead and we'll slide our hub locking pins back in. Reattach our clips. Okay. And obviously when you put this hub back on, make sure that the ABS port faces the sensor. So before you put this into operation, you want to grease these ball joints. There's an upper zerk fitting here, and the other one's down here lower. And you're going to use a needle style and get in there just like that. And also, now that your axle's been reinstalled, you want to put in brand new gear oil before you set off on the road. And just be careful not to pinch the sensor between the hub and the knuckle. Okay. Then you can go ahead, torque down your hub bolts to the torque specification, reinstall your axle nut, a brand new axle nut with red Loctite, reinstall your brakes, reinstall the ABS sensor with brand new blue Loctite, and you've just now completed your installation in a Dynatrac ball joint kit.